Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning, Crosspointe. I thought we'd start today with a song by request. And I have to admit that this song is, for better or worse, very appropriate for where we are in 2020. We're glad you're here. Crazy, but that's how it goes. Millions of people living as foes. Maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate. Mental wounds not healing, driving me insane. And I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I've listened to preachers, and I've listened to fools. I've watched all the dropouts who make their own rules. One person conditioned to rule and control. The media sells it, and we all live the role. Mental wounds still screaming, driving me insane. And I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I know that things are going wrong for me. You've got to listen to my words, yeah. Heirs of a Cold War, it's what we've become. Inheriting trouble and then passing it on. crazy, I just cannot bear. We're living with something that just isn't fair. Mental wounds not healing, who or what's to blame? And I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. I'm going off the rails on a crazy, 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 crazy train. I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. Maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate. This next song we're going to sing together was inspired by the Sursum Corda, which is a Latin phrase for the opening dialogue to a 3rd century liturgy known as the Eucharistic prayer. And this dialogue, the Sursum Corda, is still included in just about all of the liturgical traditions across the Christian spectrum. We don't know much about that here in the West, or at least our non-denominational, we're kind of runaways in the Christian church. But it's good to know that we're connected with a long history of a very diverse Christian spectrum, all kinds of streams. And here's an example of the Sursum Corda. This comes from the Church of England. Basically what we see here is an agreement, 3 agreements between the priest and the people. And they're basically stating their shared intentions for the worship gathering. It struck me as funny this week that my job, kind of bizarre, has me transitioning from Ozzy Osbourne to a 3rd century liturgy with a Latin name. But it's how life is. It's how life and faith are. I think Ozzy nails the experience of being human in 2020, even though that song was written in the 80s, I believe. But just the chaos and the anxiety, the confusion and the stress that we live in, that we carry with us. And then the Sursum Corda is always there patiently to invite us once again to contextualize our lives, to be in line with centuries of Christian people who weekly remind themselves that their life is lived every moment within the presence of God. That we can be reminded that life is given to us as a gift moment to moment, and that it's good for us to give thanks. And I hope that this morning in singing this song, we can somehow, and gathering, we can somehow collectively help each other lift our hearts to God, to lift the heaviness of the pain and the grief and the confusion and the anxiety that we feel, that we could lift those hearts to God and that we could find there hope and peace and love and grace. So as we sing this next song, I want to invite all of us to state our shared intentions for this gathering. God bless you. The peace of the Lord is upon us. Joy will be our strength. The Lord be with you this morning. We come to give thanks. Lift your heart. We lift them up. Lift your voice. We lift our song. Lift your heart. We lift them up. life will you guide us? Greet the day with peace. Lift your heart, lift your voice, lift your heart, lift your voice. Lord of creation, we'll praise the Trinity. Christ our incarnate salvation, may we embody thee. Lift your hearts, lift your voice, lift your heart. Gather to pray and to break bread. We speak grace and peace, to love God and love our neighbors. We sing for those in need. Lift your heart, lift your voice, lift your heart, lift your voice, lift your heart, lift your voice, lift your heart, lift your
Hello, Crosspointe family. I miss you people. I don't know if you've been feeling that way. I have a lot lately. I've been thinking about it the last few weeks, how much I miss seeing all of you in 3D on the weekend. I find myself thinking, I wonder how he's doing, she's doing, I wonder how that thing worked out. And sometimes I email, but I don't always reach out. I probably should more. But I miss you people, and from what I can tell, many of you share that sentiment. Every once in a while, I'll run into a Crosspointe person out in the wild at a grocery store or something, and if we happen to recognize each other with our masks on, have a great conversation. And one of the questions that comes up every time is, when are we meeting together again? Oftentimes, the person will lean forward and drop their voice like they're getting insider information. Like, what are the plans to meet together? Like, is there a secret meeting now that you could tell me about? And I want to assure you, there are secret meetings, but there's only a few of you that are invited. No, there are no secret meetings, and there are no plans, as we have said, to meet in the near future. As much as we would love to get back to whatever normal means and be back on our campus and get to offer all those great environments for everybody at every stage of their life, and just to be together in a room again together, can't wait. We want to do that so much, but we have no plans to do that anytime soon, because as much as we want to be together, what we want more than that is to do our part as a community to slow the spread of COVID until science and medicine can get ahead of it. And so really look forward to being back together, but that's where we are for now. But of course, this doesn't mean that we're completely cut off from each other. Because I know we're tired of the virtual thing to one degree or another. It's wearing on us. It doesn't check all the boxes. It's really highlighted that human beings were made to be in each other's presence. And as much of a blessing as it is that we're all gathered around some sort of screen right now, that technology has allowed us some continuity, we do recognize it doesn't check all the boxes for what it means to be in human relationships. But we also want to continue to remind all of us that it doesn't mean that we're cut off from one another. So I want to give you a few ways that we're continuing to do ministry and continuing to connect with one another. And as I'm going through these, you might think, well, that's not for me. Don't care about that. Don't have time for that. And I totally understand that. But also know we're in this together. And so I might be giving you information you can share with somebody else or another family who's really looking for some connections, for some overlap with other people at a church. So this is for you, or it's for you to share with somebody else. So here's a couple things we're doing. Like one, we're excited that Edge restarts today, right after service at 11 o'clock. Edge restarts. So if you're in middle school, grades 6 through 8, we're having Edge, but it's called Edge Remix because it's all the best parts of what Edge was, but it's been remixed to accommodate, the way everything is right now. So all the best parts from Edge, plus some new interactive elements, some new kinds of games, new chances to connect around the deepest part of ourselves, to be part of great conversations and great teaching. And so, like I said, immediately following service at 11 o'clock, if you're a middle schooler or you know one, really hope that you can tune in for that. Then tonight, if you're in high school or you know a high schooler, life groups start at 6:30. So if you're registered, you should have already got an email from your group leader that has all the important details. Really, really glad that that's happening for our younger siblings of faith in high school. It's so important, and there's so much pressure and so much work to do right now with school, but we don't want to forget the important part of us, that we have to overlap with each other and really nurture that deep part of ourselves. So that's tonight at 6:30. And then, as always, the programs and others, you can find links in the description underneath the video, and that give you a lot more information about other things that are happening, such as if your children are in preschool or in elementary, simultaneously with this service right now, we also have teaching and materials for that age group. And if the morning's not great, they'll be there for you later as well. So again, those links are always in the description. Also, restarting September 9th is Unpolished. We've been doing Unpolished for years. Unpolished is an open group for all adult women. You don't have to register for it. You can just show up. It's going to be going every other Wednesday. We've been doing it for years. The many women who have been part of this program just rave about it. And if that's a fit for you or for somebody that you know, we wanted you to know that we're excited that relaunches September 9th. Again, you don't have to register. You can just show up. And if you have questions, make sure and ask. And then a little bit of a plug for something that I have been doing for years. Every Wednesday, Wake Up Man. Every Wednesday, we've been doing it for years, really easily transitioned to doing it virtually. It's gone really, really well. From 7 to 8 o'clock, I started at 7, I ended at 8, and to accommodate our busy schedules, men of every description are invited to come. I typically lead some discussion. I lead a Bible study or some sort of study that goes deeper than what we typically would even do on a Sunday. And then there's plenty of chances for interaction and discussion, lots of great questions that we all toss at each other. It's been great for me. It's been great for a lot of people. Some real great friendships, relationships have been birthed at a Wake Up Man. So it's not a shameless plug. I feel good about it. I hope that if that describes you or somebody that you know, that you join us at Wake Up Man. Again, you don't have to register. You can go to Crosspointe's homepage. It says online gatherings, and the link for that and Unpolished and everything else is right there for you. All right. And then finally, I'd like to remind you that your financial contributions continue not only to fund programming such as I've just detailed and a host of others as well. It not only does that, but now as much or more than ever, it assists people all over our region with some real need. We have helped countless people with rent and bills and mortgages, literally putting food on so many tables and keeping shelter, roofs over people's heads, helping people with counseling, helping schools with school supplies, on and on and on. There's so many ways that our financial contributions are doing some real good, not just at Crosspointe, but it's equipping Crosspointe to make a huge, huge difference. So if you have been a financial contributor or you never have and you'd like to get started, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can just mail in a check. That's one way to do it, so we will get it. Or you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute, and it will detail a whole bunch of other ways that you can get involved financially through PayPal or through direct donation of stocks and all kinds of different ways. Or you can text crosspointenc to 77977 on your phone and get set up to contribute financially that way. Well, like I said, I miss you people, and I can't wait to be in the same space with you again. But until then, there's so much that we're doing together and so much that we're getting to do that puts God's love on display, and I'm honored to be a small part of that with you.
When peace like a river attended my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever, my Lord, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
I want to draw our attention this morning to an interesting pattern that we find throughout the accounts of Jesus' life. Now, these accounts that we find in the Bible, they're written by 4 different authors: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And each of these authors was writing to a different audience. And so they edited and framed the stories of Jesus in slightly different ways, depending on what message they were trying to communicate to a particular group of people. But throughout all 4 accounts, there's this recurring theme that I want us to try to notice today. Matthew chapter 8. It says, when Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Now, for a little context here, whenever someone had leprosy or really any other type of similar skin disease, that person would typically be considered ceremonially unclean, or basically just unable to participate in religious ceremonies and have just any basic human contact with people. But in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, in the book of Leviticus, there were these steps that were laid out for the people of God, like a protocol of sorts, for someone to be declared clean again if the skin disease cleared up somehow. And part of that was you had to have a priest basically sign off that you were now good to go. And so Jesus heals this man and tells him to go to the priest, basically so he can follow the protocol, right? So he can be verified and be granted entrance back into the community. But what I want us to notice most is what Jesus says to him first after he heals him. He says this, he says, "See that you don't tell anyone." Now, let's say that you've heard some things about Jesus, but you're not really familiar with a lot of the specifics. I want you to put yourself in the position of someone reading this for the first time, because wouldn't you be like, isn't that kind of like the point? I mean, isn't the point that people should be telling everyone about Jesus and what Jesus has done and what Jesus can do? I mean, that would seem to kind of be the point, right? And yet, we keep seeing this pattern over and over again. Matthew chapter 12 says, "Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. He warned them not to tell others about him." Matthew 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now, the Son of Man was like a nickname, right, for the Messiah, the one who was to come. The disciples replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." And then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So again, one has to wonder, like, wait a second. I mean, isn't this the point of saving the world? That everybody gets told that Jesus is the Messiah? Isn't that the point? It seems very counterintuitive. Now let's look at what another one of the authors, Mark, he writes this in chapter 1. He says, "That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed, and the whole town gathered at the door. And Jesus healed many who had various diseases, and then he also drove out many demons. But he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was." Now, throughout all the stories of Jesus' life that we see in the scriptures, we see all sorts of people getting confused about who he is. Right? His own students get confused. The religious and political leaders of the day, they get confused. Some called him a drunkard, others a glutton. He got called a blasphemer. Others called him out of his mind. Others called him demon-possessed. I want you to think about this. The one group that knows exactly who he is the whole time are demons. That demons throughout the Gospels are like, "Yeah, we know who you are. You're Jesus the Christ. You're the Messiah. We know who you are." Of all the groups that could have understood who Jesus was, who could have paid attention enough to know, of all the groups, the demons are the ones that are crystal clear on this. And Mark writes like it's no big deal. He writes this account like it's no big deal. Like, of course, everybody knows that when you drive out demons, you should be like, "Well, you know what? All right, demons. Hey, remember, let's just keep this on the down low just between us," right? I mean, that's a weird story, isn't it? But these same themes keep continuing throughout the gospel accounts. We see this in Mark chapter 7. I won't put this whole story on the screen, but basically it's where people bring to Jesus this man who was deaf and who could barely talk. And so Jesus touches the man and he heals him so that he can hear and talk again. And then apparently the first thing Jesus says to the man and his friends and family was, "Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone what's happened, what I've done." We see the same pattern in Luke's account, where a man named Jairus tells Jesus that his daughter is dead. And so Jesus goes to the house and he tells those gathered outside that the girl isn't dead, rather she's simply asleep. And then we read this, Luke chapter 8, and it says they laughed at him. These people that were gathered outside the house, oftentimes there would be people that would be almost like paid mourners that would come and grieve. And so it wasn't like mourning for real, but they would just kind of fake mourn and wail and cry. And so it's probably this same group of people because they hear what Jesus says and then they laugh. And they laugh at Jesus knowing that she was dead. But it says Jesus took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. And her parents were astonished. But Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So again, Jesus does something miraculous. And this little girl's parents' minds are blown. And the very next thing Jesus does is say, all right, let's just keep this between us. Right? Don't tell anybody. Now, this is just an odd way to start a movement. This Jesus that comes to bring good news and healing to the entire world doesn't seem to want anyone to know about it. And this is a pattern that we see over and over again in the accounts of Jesus' life. And so when you're reading through these accounts and reflecting on what Jesus actually said and what Jesus actually did, that starts to raise all sorts of questions. Questions that are worth wrestling with. Now, there's one more story I want you to look at. It's recorded by John in the fourth gospel. John writes this in chapter 6, where we see this rather famous story of Jesus' life. He feeds 5,000 people, and all of it's catalyzed by this young boy sharing 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And at the end of the story, we read this, verse 14. It says, after the people saw the sign Jesus had performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So the people, these crowds, right? They all rally around and they want to make Jesus king. They want to force Jesus to be king. And notice Jesus' response isn't, you know what, this is great. I mean, I didn't even have to put myself out there. I didn't even have to say I'm king. I didn't even have to lobby for it. They're just making me king. Now I'll be in the position of power. Now we can really get this message out to the masses. We can spread the good news far and wide. Now I can drum up the support we need and we can start fixing things. We can start getting things done because this campaign here that I'm on, this Messiah campaign, it can finally start to get some momentum here. But Jesus doesn't say that. Rather, it says Jesus left the crowds and withdrew to a mountain by himself. But this just isn't this isn't the way this kind of story usually goes, right? It's not how the standard Messiah path, the standard Messiah story goes, where the one who's going to fix things, the one who's going to lead people toward the best life starts to become well known and people start to talk about how amazing that person is. And the time comes when there's a new leader that's needed. And so that person's name gets thrown out there. And so they just jump in and people around them start campaigning and you find they hear about him doing something miraculous where maybe he heals somebody, does some great thing. And you're like, okay, we got to make sure the word gets out about this because I need to rally up as much support as possible for this candidate. I need votes. And it's all part of this campaign strategy. This is the way it usually goes. But there's clearly something about this typical path that Jesus keeps resisting. Jesus is like, no, I didn't come to do that. And he keeps insisting, he keeps resisting the version of the story that seems like the default one to take. Ironically, though, it seems that very often people today still want to pull Jesus into the kind of role where he can dominate, where he can control, where he can rally up support for himself, like it's some sort of campaign. And there's a lot of people that want to put Jesus in that kind of role, that kind of space, because again, it seems like the natural default. And we can pretend that it's different because in religious circles, especially in Christian religious circles, we can attach all sorts of Christianese lingo to it. But it's often very similar approaches to anyone trying to gain power and control and domination. And just like most every other religious person thought 2,000 years ago, we can still have those same expectations today of how we think the Jesus story should go. How we think it looks like for Jesus to be in power. But the actual Jesus that we see in the scriptures kept resisting this typical assumed storyline that's easy to default to. Now, there's a whole lot we could get into about all the different ways that we try to pull Jesus into the kind of story that we see Jesus resisting in the scriptures. But in keeping with the heart of the series that we've been walking through the last several weeks, this Don't Believe Your Eye, what I want us to do is I want us to take the remainder of our time this morning and talk about a couple of stories and narratives that we may need to resist in ourselves. Stories and assumptions and patterns that we can find ourselves falling into that may need resisting. And especially ones that I think all of us are prone to, in particular at this time and place. Here in the year 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, where most of our relational interactions take place via the internet, in the middle of a very tense national election, in the middle of a very emotionally infused, divided culture and nation. And so what I want to do is I want to offer us a couple questions that I believe can be really helpful to all of us right now. And so I'm just going to encourage you to maybe jot them down on your phone, maybe on your laptop or your piece of paper, that you can find some way to keep these in front of you. And my hope is that they can help us all better resist some of those default narratives that we can easily find ourselves entrenched in. And so the first question is this: am I here to get it right or be right? Am I here to get it right or be right? Now, this is a question that I got from author and researcher Brene Brown. And it's one that I think is so very helpful, that when we find ourselves in a disagreement with someone over politics, whether it's online or over the phone or in person, or we find ourselves at odds with a spouse or a teenager, or we find ourselves backing different ideas and solutions than our boss does, or a coworker does, or an employee does, it's incredibly important to stop and ask the question, okay, am I here to get it right or to be right? Because you see, an attitude of, I'm here to get it right, when that's the attitude we take, that's infused with a built-in sense of humility. It's a willingness to ask questions and to listen and to try and understand. Because the posture we take is, in this moment, I'm here not to be right, but to get it right. And it comes with this willingness to learn and take responsibility for mistakes. It comes with the willingness to quickly and sincerely apologize when we realize that we're wrong. It comes with a willingness to change our mind and actions when new, better, more loving and just ways to be human get made known to us. All of that is contained in, you know what? I want to take a posture of, I'm here to get it right. But when we approach a conversation or an interaction with an attitude of, you know what? I'm here to be right. Now, again, we're not going to say that out loud. We're not going to enter into a conversation, you know what? I'm entering into this knowing that I'm right. But many of us, without ever saying that out loud, that's the kind of attitude we bring. What we bring with us in that moment is an attitude that's very prone to defensiveness and arrogance. And one of the telltale signs of that is we find ourselves demanding to be understood. And then while we might find ourselves pausing to listen to the other person, it's typically only the kind of listening that's this attempt for us to just be polite in conversation. But we're really not listening to what they say. We're just basically waiting for them to stop talking so that we can present our own better point of view. And this attitude of, you know what, I'm here to be right, this posture of I'm here to be right, often comes with this demand to be seen as right because of one's position of power or authority. We take this attitude of, you know what, I'm the parent, I'm the boss, I'm the coach, I'm the leader. You know what, I have to be right because of my position, so you know what, I am right. And it's often surrounded by this intense pressure for us to be right, or at least be seen as right, because of the cost that may come with actually not being right. Because it may cost us our authority, it could cost us our leverage, our influence, our source of income, our reputation, as the one who always has to have the right answers. And so whenever there's this pressure of, you know what, I have to be right, I can't under any circumstances be seen as wrong, what it leads to is pretending. It leads to lying, making up stories, making up evidence. And whenever one gets cornered and faced with the truth, you'll notice this. What you'll see is that there's this desperate attempt to spin and to deflect and to blame others so that they can find a way to still be seen as right. You know, one of the things I've told my boys their entire lives is don't trust a leader who refuses to apologize and admit when they're wrong. That being trustworthy isn't about always being right. That being trustworthy is about when you do get it wrong, which will happen, you will get it wrong. when that happens, you own it and you take responsibility for it. That is what makes you trustworthy. Not trying to come off like you never get it wrong. That actually destroys trust. And that's true of a parent, it's true of a boss, it's true even of the highest elected officials in our land. And still, it's easy for any of us at times to buy into this myth of, you know what? I have to be right. I have to be seen as right, because if not, it'll cost me too much. It might cost me everything. And so we have to resist that narrative when it creeps up in us, and we have to learn to disbelieve it. Which is why in any conversation, any conflict, any disagreement, it's so important to keep that question in front of us. Okay, as I enter into this, am I here to get it right or to be right? Or even just to pause in the middle of it where the conflict starts escalating. Again, with a parent, with a spouse, with a kid, a boss, a coworker, someone online, hit the pause button and ask, okay, wait a second, am I here to get it right or be right? Now, there's a second question that I think is critical to make ourselves constantly aware of, especially right now in 2020. And it's this: how am I determining value and success? Now, I get that that may sound rather lofty, but I want you to hang in there with me for a minute because I really do think it's important. And it's this increasingly important question for us to wrestle with because we live in this age of this crazy invention called the internet. And over the past 6 months, our lives have become further intertwined and dependent on the internet. And again, I'm really grateful for the internet. It's what's allowing you and I to stay in touch right now in this moment. There's so much good that comes from it. But like most everything else that has good parts to it, there can also be a shadow side to it. And it's important that we stay awake to that. And one of those things is how the internet determines value and success. You see, in the world of the internet, the metric for success is how many followers can you generate? How many likes? How many clicks can you get? How many views can you get? That's how value and success are determined because that's what generates money. And the reality is, similar metrics have always been used in how we determine value and success in economies, all the way back from the origins of humanity, when those with the most wealth and the most possessions and the most livestock were seen as the most blessed and the most favored by the gods or by God. But in the last 6 months, where so much of our lives have been immersed online even more, it just seems like that's been amplified a bit. And so here's something that I want us to pay attention to, that I think it's really important for us to stay awake to. And that is that the internet is driven by a narrative that gears itself toward conflict, toward the absurd, the shocking, the outrageous, the over-the-top, the frightening. And the algorithms that fuel the back end of the internet push this type of content to you and I because it's what draws the most attention. It's what creates the most controversy and therefore engagement. It's what's most at times just even the absurd and what even is the most silly. For instance, that's why when you look at the 2 videos in the world that have gained more than 6 billion views on YouTube, again, that's with a B, billion views. One of them is this. Now listen, I'm not knocking Baby Shark. I mean, it's its own jam, right? And I can respect the jam. But over 6 billion views of that. Now, let's do this. Let's take a look at 4 of the top 10 articles that have been shared, liked, and commented on Facebook earlier this spring. I want you to take a look at them. I'll list them here for you. 1, Trump suggests injection of disinfectant to beat coronavirus and clean the lungs. That news article was shared, liked, or commented on 6,469,899 times on Facebook alone. Another one, coronavirus hype, biggest political hoax in history. U.S. hospitals getting paid more to label cause of death as coronavirus. Biden cuts hole in mask so he can sniff people's hair. Friends, this is the kind of content the internet is geared toward. And we have to stay awake to that. And we have to realize that there is no algorithm on the internet that helps determine, you know what? Is this good? Is this true? Is this honorable? Is it respectful, dignified? Is it mean? Is it nasty? Is it a lie? Does this help us move forward as a people toward equality and justice, or does it move us backwards? There's no algorithms for that that's driving the internet. It's simply the mechanism in the background of, does this thing attract attention or not? And if it does, let's send more people in that direction, because that's where the money is. The internet doesn't have mechanisms by which it can discern what the New Testament writer Paul talks about when he writes this: finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Think about those things. Now, imagine with me for a moment how much traction, how many likes, retweets a tweet like this would get. Let's imagine the tweet just said this: a single mom was able to pay her rent due to the generosity of her friends. Now, a tweet like that definitely wouldn't stir up a lot of excitement on the internet, right? But for that single mom, it's life-changing. Changes everything. Or how about this? What if a tweet simply said, a dad stuck in quarantine at home with his family was able to spontaneously say yes to his kid's request to throw the baseball in the backyard for 30 minutes in the middle of the day. Now, that's not a tweet that would likely start trending all over the internet, right? But how good and beautiful is that? For that dad and his kid in the midst of so many losses during quarantine. Maybe another one. What if the tweet just said, a woman took another step today toward forgiving her father? Or what if a tweet simply said, you know what? A teacher said something encouraging to one of his students today on a Google Meetup call that made that student feel a little more seen and valued than he thought that he was. Or maybe a tweet that just says this: a friend sent a seemingly random text to another friend who was struggling, and it made that friend feel a little less lonely and isolated in the world. You see, none of those tweets would light up the internet. None of those tweets would get all sorts of shares and retweets and go viral. But for those actually living it out, they mean everything. And the reality is that they're good and noble and pure and right and lovely and admirable. And so it's important for you and I to be reminded that as our lives get more and more intertwined with the internet, that we resist the narrative that what we do each day only really has great value and significance if it's big, if it gets noticed and recognized by large groups of people. And if it doesn't, then somehow it doesn't really matter. Friends, it will be tempting for all of us to believe that, because it seems that's just how the stories we all see around us often go. But again, that's a narrative we have to learn to resist. We have to disbelieve. And so, friends, may we be people that regularly ask ourselves these two questions. when we find ourselves in the midst of a conversation where there's disagreement, where a dialogue, where things get heated, where there's conflict, again, with a spouse or a parent or a friend or a coworker, someone online, that we would ask ourselves the question, okay, wait a second. Am I here to get it right? Or am I here to be right? And then when we find ourselves maybe staring up at the ceiling at night, feeling like prayers are bouncing off the walls, reflecting back on our day, wondering what in the world we accomplished or actually got done, that we'd ask, okay, wait a second, how am I determining value and success? How am I actually determining value and success? And friends, may we be the people that have the courage to resist the pressure of the increasing narratives around us that insist that we have to be right, so that it makes it easier for us to draw lines and split our world into the us and the thems. And that what we do only has worth and value if it gains a lot of attention. That we would allow ourselves to disbelieve that, to resist that narrative, and may that lead you and I toward more freedom and in alignment with the Spirit of Christ. And it's in the name and the reputation of the resurrected Christ Jesus that we pray. That, amen.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.